run here going, and looks like there's going to be some decent weather here for the next, at least week, 10 days from what I saw in the forecast. A lot of fertilizer is going to get on, a lot of anhydrous, a lot of manure, and a lot of tillage. Well, hey, looks like we've got straight up 8 o'clock, and we are ready to get rolling. So welcome to the November 8th edition of the DACAT. Glad to have a special guest, Craig Lamore. Craig, always a pleasure to have you. We know you've been running hard with harvest, as have a lot of people. So glad you could join us. I've worked with Craig for a lot of years. I don't know if I could even count that many up. I somewhere around, 23, give or take, somewhere in there.
Yep. Whenever Monsanto purchased DEKALB, that was the beginning.
Yeah. Had a few different titles. We've always kind of been together on the agronomy and tech development side. You a little bit more on the research and tech development, and me more on the agronomy.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I learned all my agronomic skills from Jim. So just to warn everybody.
That's a little scary. Of course, Craig, we had some good titles. What was one of your favorites back in the day?
Well, we were called an agronomic systems manager, and they almost called us an agronomic systems specialist, and that would have been an acronym of ASS, and would have been quite fitting most days. But we were known as the ASS men for a while there, ASM. So
good. I dropped those books off the studio today. I left it team with HP.
Wore that badge very proudly. Carried it off.
Oh, that's fine. I just let you know, and then let me know.
We do know it's all recorded, but we can get by with that.
Yeah, it'll be fine.
All right, we're ready to jump in. We'll start off with trivia question, talk a little bit about current topics, especially if you on the line have some current topics you want to bring up, and then end up with a little bit on some yield reports. We've had a lot of data come in, a lot of data that's being assembled still, but starting to make some sense of things, starting to see some trends. So we do want to talk about that. But for the trivia question, so we've got a hybrid DKC 5981 and DKC 5982 that cover a lot of area. They are large volume products. We've had them out for several years. So with that in mind, if that hybrid or those two hybrids together were a seed company on their own, where would they rank in market share in the US as far as a seed company? If you have a guess on that, go ahead and put it in the chat. Looks like we've got a guess, and we have got a right answer. Riley Anderson on the spot again, and Riley starting to dominate here. This is two DACATs in a row, so boy, we might have to give somebody else a chance. But good for you. And as usual, the prize is coming in the mail. Actually, I'll see you next week, so I'll give you a couple prizes then. But that is correct, which kind of blows my mind, thinking that a hybrid gets to that point, and if it's that large, it's doing something right. And also along with that, anytime you get a hybrid that is covering that many acres, then it has a lot of exposure. So you're going to see some really good, and sometimes you're going to see some challenges with it. But pretty amazing to have a hybrid that's at that level. All right, well, we're going to keep moving, jump right in, talk a little bit about some of the product performance, and be curious from the group what you're seeing. So again, using the chat if you would, or certainly can come off mute and say some of the hybrids or varieties that are doing well, I guess, especially some that exceeded expectations. I know for myself, I have a lot of high expectations of our products, so sometimes it's hard to exceed those expectations. But it does seem like every year, there's products that jump out at you. Some products, just do what they're supposed to do, and just boy, they're consistent. just like we like them. But I guess as far as people on the line, dealers and FSRs. And Craig, I'm glad you didn't jump in and answer the question because I know you've been known to do that.
Yes, no, I had to refrain. It was really hard, but I did it somehow.
But glad to see you pipe in on this one. 107.33, 110.10, 108.64, 101.33, 105.33. Yeah, certainly agree with that list. Those are some products that have really stuck out. 59.82, definitely have seen that one do extremely well. 63.90. I'm sure everyone out there has all kinds of different stories from yield monitors. One in particular that stuck out, a grower that was harvesting 63.91 was seeing 360 on the yield monitor for quite a while and had a field average of around 310 on 63.91. So we know that one has tremendous top end. Nate, appreciate those comments. 107.33, 56.65, 68.34 for those full season buffs. 107.33, 101.33 and 35, 105.33 and 35 from James. Yeah, on the bean side, number of products: 21 XF2s, 18 XF1s, 15 XF2s, 27 XF3s, 24 XF1s. So good. A lot of different products represented, that's for sure. So how about on the flip side? Not every product is perfect. Not every product meets expectations. There's always some challenges out there. So flipping over to hybrids of varieties that maybe did not meet expectations, if there are any. Just along those lines, I noticed, obviously the maturity differences on corn, and we're going to talk a little bit about that coming up here in a few minutes. But also you tend to see some products that, that have been released in the last couple of years really have risen to the top. And boy, I think it's a credit to our breeding organization. We've had some really good products, over the years, 5438, that have been able to last for a dozen years. And it seems like that's tough to do anymore because of the breeding cycle. We've talked about how the advancements we've made, marker-assisted breeding, seed chipping, everything else, we can advance the yield levels so quickly. So I think it's going to be rare to have a product like a 5438 stay around as long as it did. And we could see even some products that have a little bit of age, 4 or 5 years old. A lot of times they had a challenge keeping up with some of the newer genetics. Good comment as far as on the later beans in general, maybe that we're having a little bit of a challenge. 31 XF2, but as we got later, I noticed that on soybeans, and this is kind of a general statement, so there's always going to vary by area, but I did see that a lot of the later beans either ran out of moisture, just didn't have the chance to finish, or maybe the heat over Labor Day pushed them over the edge where some earlier beans already had filled out those pods. But I did tend to see that trend. The fuller season beans didn't quite ring the bell like some of the other early group 2s, mid group 2.
Yeah, and I would agree with that too, Jim, that they just didn't seem to pack on the yield for the amount of late season rain that we got. And then you couple that with some tougher green stems, and they give you a little bit of not a sour taste, but a little bit of it's like you remember that when you're harvesting them because they're a little bit more challenging and they take more power. And so, but 27 XF3s weren't the best variety this year, but they still did pretty good. But those early ones, they were hard to beat because they threshed nicer and they put on the yield very similarly.
Yeah, no, that's a great point. Yeah, if you're making the combine work that hard, you want to see a little extra something for the effort.
Yep.
Yeah. So otherwise, as far as current topics out there, I guess Craig, maybe, a few comments from you as far as just, along those lines of things you were seeing or trends that you noticed throughout the fall.
So a couple of things going through harvest, and I try to think back to the whole growing season. It's just the fact that it seems like one of the main events that changed or caused some things to maybe not to go as planned was that rain event that we had in May. Wherever you were, some of you might not have got that rain event, but we got around 4 inches that weekend, May 11th, 12th, whatever the days were. And there was a lot of stuff planted right before that and some stuff right after that. But the stuff that was planted right before that, in regards to corn especially, there was a lot of stand loss in places. Now that would depend on residue, tillage, and so on. But that's what I saw. Some of the biggest differences in yield potential was those planting dates on corn that were right before that big rain event, or if you had some other big rain event in your area, if you had some corn fields planted before then, losing that stand, I think, was detrimental this year based on the data that I'm looking at. Where I left checks, where I planted higher populations in the corn, I got a better final stand, even though it wasn't what I planted. It was a better final stand. And with these late season rains, it just really helped establish a better yield potential. Along with that, it seems, again, I saw the trend on the corn hybrids, especially the fuller season products, doing extremely well. And when I say that, getting into the 105 RM, the 110 RM especially, those RM groups just seem to really pack on, about an extra 10 bushel each over the previous RM. So again, and you just look at your own, if you have your own test plots or you have your own fields and you maybe spread out the RM, some of your customers, you just start looking at the yield potential. It's like you're always going to find an early hybrid that does really well, and I've got examples of that. But when you look at the overall picture, it just feels like our growing seasons are favoring that fuller season RM, and I often wonder that the beans aren't quite as visible in that regard, but I feel like the beans are starting to slide a little bit towards mid group 2 again. And again, I could be wrong on that, but it's not always the late group 1s that are really kicking butt and taking names, or the early group 2s. It feels like the mid group 2s, the 2-4s, the 5s, and the 6s are starting to pull back some of their yield potential. And I think that's with some of our growing season that we have and the rains that we've been getting, especially this year and even last year, I'd say.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, a lot of good points. It seemed like the stand, and I know in your plot was a good example as far as having a washout and having some stand loss. Certainly on soybeans, there's a lot of crusting from that heavy rain in the second week of May. Beans usually are pretty resilient; they can branch out, but probably as much replanting that I've seen as far as crusting on soybeans in my career. Sometimes we have replant on drowned outs, but this year was more just poor stand, crusting, whatever other issues, herbicide issues. We've talked about that. A lot of herbicide injury early on both corn and beans, but boy, especially on soybeans. So pretty overall of a tough start to the growing season. When you look back at what all it went through, it's amazing we are seeing the yields that we are.
Yeah, and again, I'm bamboozled by the whole result, generally speaking, because as humans, we always want more, right? But you're out in the field, and when 200 bushel corn is a real bummer, boy, there's something, you just sit there and you think about that for a minute, because I can remember 20 years ago where 200 bushel corn was king. So it's just, it's pretty interesting to see the shift in performance and what the germplasm and trait packages have brought us, and corn and beans both, and the capabilities that they have. It's pretty amazing. We beat them up and down the pike, every season, and they always come through with some pretty impressive numbers.
Every fall, I think all of us on the line get calls about something negative going on. Somebody that was disappointed. Which I would say this year there's always a few of those, but probably one of the lower years that I can remember. And I've actually had almost as many calls of people saying, where is this yield coming from? I mean, legitimately asking that question. So that's kind of fun, getting more positive calls than negative calls. But that's been one fun topic to talk about. And you always say, okay, genetics have helped as far as tolerance and the ability to take higher populations and take stress and still yield. But obviously, there's a lot of management, a lot of other factors, equipment, some of the planting technology, everything has all added to bring in years like this when we start seeing that 270, 280, 300 bushel level get cracked. It's unbelievable.
Yep.
Mm.
Yep.
But also the challenges, and there's some issues, especially as we get later here into harvest, dealing with standability, and it's always tough to figure out, especially like this particular field that I'm showing. You've got the same hybrid throughout this field. You've got great standability behind the area there in front, but then you've got areas that are just down. And kind of been talking about this all year, where we know in a stressful year, you're going to have big differences by water holding capacity, stress levels, obviously fertility. But again, going back to some of the things early in the season, dry June. Even if the field had excellent potassium levels, we know that potassium deficiency showed up just because it was so tightly bound in those clay particles. And so we did see quite a bit of potassium deficiency early. And yeah, once we got rain, once we got a bigger root mass, it kind of went away. But some of that lack of uptake of potassium, I think, still showed up later season, contributed to some standability issues. And we've actually had this same slide up before talking about unevenness throughout the field, but I think this also contributed to some of the standability issues. Residue, not only pushing that plant back, making it later, making it spindlier, but also it was tying up nutrients. So, tying up nitrogen, sulfur, maybe even potassium. And so that early nutrient tie up can set those corn plants back. And again, sometimes they have a hard time recovering as far as being able to pull enough nutrients into the system to really maintain that plant health, that stalk health all the way through.
Yeah, and I would argue and agree with you 100% that we always have the deficiencies every year somewhere. But I often wonder if residue isn't the lead cause on that pyramid of problem causing, if you will, that the soybeans that we're producing, again, those yields are going up too. We don't talk about them as much because they're not as fun to talk about as 300 bushel corn. But if you're raising 60, 70, 80 bushel beans, that is a lot of residue that's laying out there, and trying to do minimum tillage and things like that. It really adds another complex layer of trying to establish a good corn crop, especially the next spring. Don't worry about it as much in beans, but you can still see the same problem in beans, obviously. But boy, in corn, it really has shown up the last couple of years, Jim.
Yeah, and this residue issue has been building. It seems like we've had dry falls. We've had good crop, but so plenty of residue. Hoping maybe with a little more moisture this fall, that we're starting to break down our residue a little quicker maybe than we have in the past few falls. So we'll see what that means for spring. But yeah, the residue issues continue to not only hold back some of the nutrient availability, but just some of the evenness of the stand early on in the season. I was remiss to mention that Paige Thompson wanted to be on, but she is under the weather today, so she is not able to. So wish her the best, but glad to have you on, Craig. So at least I'm not going solo.
And I'm not a replacement for Paige, that's for sure. So
we're going to talk a little bit about data here to finish up. We're starting to get some summary data, and I always like looking at that big picture, taking some averages. When you look at data, the more comparisons, the better. Sometimes that kind of smooths things out, but I like to compare DEKALB, and this would be really all the DEKALB hybrids in Northwest Iowa, generally 96 day up to about 116, as compared to Brevant, Golden Harvest, NK, and Pioneer. And this database would be probably 80% compared to Brevant and Pioneer. We do have some Golden Harvest and NK comparisons. Frankly, not to sound too mean, but we are beating up very handily on the Syngenta platform with Golden Harvest and NK. Brevant and Pioneer are closer competitors, no question. But on average, we have really done well, looking at about a 7.4 bushel advantage when you're talking 1,238 comparisons in Northwest Iowa as of about 2 days ago. And then Craig, looking at your plot in particular, and just wanted to bring this out again to hit on some of those trends that you were mentioning on the maturity side.
Yeah. So, and again, this is not to bash the early RMs. That is not the point of this. But I just find it. I've been tracking this for the last couple of years, and I was just trying to find my file on my laptop, and I haven't found it yet. But I will find it, and I will add this data to it as well, Jim, and get that to you. But over the last, I think it's 5 or 6 years, this is basically the way the trend has been going, is towards the fuller season. And so the yellow highlighted are the top 5 in the whole plot for yield and or dollars per acre. And I believe the dollars are $4.75 a bushel and 4.5 cents for drying. And looking at each RM group, so you got your 100-day, which is 98 to 102. You got your 105-day, which is 103 to 107, and 110 is 108 to 112, and 115 is 113 to 117. And again, you just look at those averages, and again, it's just a quick way to it's like, that's pretty interesting. It's basically a 10 bushel jump almost until you get to 115. And I really think at the 115, you'll find the occasional high flyer in Northwest Iowa. And it depends on where you are, obviously. But that 105, 110, that's our meat, if you will. That's where we should be doing a lot of planting of those hybrids, again, in my opinion. But at the same time, I highlighted the top 3 in each RM group. So there's still some star performers in the 100, and everybody's got to plant some earlier corn. And one other thing that I did notice is that a lot of those products are SmartStax VT4 or SmartStax Pro. Not all of them, but several of them. And that says a lot for our technology group that we have within Bayer, and the products that we release and put into the DEKALB bag. And just really exciting products. I'm extremely excited for the new class that we introduced this year. And going to be a difficult decision for a lot of growers, like if they can get the seed, that's the first thing, but it's going to be difficult. It's like, well, God, do I replace 5982 with 10864 or 11010, or what do I do? Because those are still good hybrids, but this makes for a lot of fun. And I was extremely shocked with these yields. This plot really surprised me. And to have 6606 come out like that, it was taking power going through the field. It was a lot of corn, but that's something that a lot of folks wouldn't dabble in Buena Vista County, because that's plenty full season.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, as we get more data in, I always like to do that comparison on maturity to see what we gain per day of maturity, and just rough figuring here, it's close to 2 bushels per maturity day. The last few years, it's actually been a little bit over that, like 2.3 or almost 2.5 per maturity day. So, we've seen that trend. My gut tells me actually this year it's a little less than maybe what we've seen the last 2 years, but still very significant. And obviously, we know the drill: plant the mix, plant the portfolio. You got to spread things out. You got to make sure you're spreading out your risk, your not only harvest risk but pollination risk. So there's definitely a need, and it's fun to see some of those products. There are some exceptions to the rule where those earlier products jump up and really keep up with some full season products.
Yeah, I had 101.33 in a field that was in a climate trial that kept up with everything. It was even very close to 107.33. So when given the moment, products like that can really shine.
Yeah, no, absolutely. So just looking at some other data, balance summaries is I think a good way to look at data. Just going to look at DEKALB compared to DEKALB. And excuse me, this is these 4 products represented in the same plot or the same field all together. And in this case, it's 24 comparisons. So that's a pretty good, powerful data base there. And you kind of get an idea how they line up on yield. Really, these 2 new early ones, 9888, 9911, you can see where they are actually keeping up pretty well. 52.99 has always been a good product, and really, 8 bushels is not bad as far as keeping up with 101.33. And then looking at the moisture, this is where you start seeing some separation with the 101.33, just having a little higher moisture, carrying a little higher, a little more stay green, a little higher moisture, even as compared to the 102-day 52.99. Jumping up into that next maturity grouping, 105.33, 56.65, 107.33, 59.82, 4 outstanding hybrids. Really just talking about a 9 bushel separation, not a huge difference there. You've got all of them performing very well. And then you look at the moisture side too, and of course you start seeing a little more separation there, just a point difference on average from 105.33 up to the 59.82. I thought it was interesting, and this 107.33, we've seen it really do well, and it actually is one that's carrying a little more moisture. And I think some of that is that SmartStax Pro version, it does seem to have very good plant health. I would say a big improvement over the 5771, the original version. And so not only is reflected in late season standability and stay green, but it's also reflected in harvest moisture.
I will make a comment. Again, you mentioned earlier, Jim, that I just finished up with my plot harvest yesterday, and 107.33 that was planted May 9th on Clarion Nickel at Webster with fungicide still got down into the 16-17s, and also it reminded me a lot of the 5771 look, where it kind of loses its top and so forth. So there were places where it was intact yet, but it was starting to lose its appearance, but standing like a rock, and by far the most consistent performer I had in that plot. So just very impressive.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. And then the late season set, throwing in a new one there with 110.10. See how things kind of jump around a little bit, but again, talking 12 fields, we've got really just a 7 bushel difference. So, all these products really being able to shine in their particular moment. But I was a little bit surprised when I started pulling this to see, because it felt like, oh boy, you're going to see these full seasons pull away. They don't have the 6606 or 04 because we just didn't have as many comparisons for them. But really seeing all these other products come in fairly close from 110 up to 115 day. And then some of the moisture differences there, and that's, we start seeing that separation. 62-69, we know that's a tighter husk, slower dry down, 112-day product. Not surprising to see it right there with 114-day, even 115-day on harvest moisture.
It's a 114 that identifies as a 112, so that's
yeah. Well, we can do that nowadays.
Yeah.
So just a couple more data points. I thought this was interesting. This was a university trial over at Dordt in Sioux County. So replicated 4 times, corn on corn, long-term corn on corn, heavy rootworm pressure. So with and without insecticide, talking full rate of force as far as a soil applied insecticide at planting time. So the 105.33, and you obviously have a germplasm difference. But first of all, comparing the with insecticide to without, statistically really not a difference there on the SmartStax Pro. SmartStax definitely saw a response to the insecticide. Still, decent yield, but you're talking a 42 bushel response. Then you look at the Double Pro, the 5554. With insecticide was able to be in the hunt right up there. Without insecticide, drops back drastically, as we would expect. Even the 5553, even though insecticide gave a huge yield response, it still was out yielding the Double Pro. So still getting a little bit of benefit out of having some of that below ground protection against rootworm. but kind of an extreme case when you're talking heavy rootworm pressure. But just it does show some of the separation, and obviously shows the power of Smart Stacks Pro and what it's been able to do. How about beans, Craig? Finish up with a little bit on beans.
Yeah. So yeah, on this slide here, 701 comparisons. And I'm assuming, Jim, you did, again, Northwest Iowa area and into southern Minnesota and southeast South Dakota. Is that what area you took?
Yep. And I do have this down in the bottom.
Oh,
It actually was
you go.
covering 4 states, and this was from 0.9 up to 3.1. So, encompasses kind of the whole range of maturity that we plant in Northwest Iowa.
Yeah. So 1.6, almost 60% win rate, which is really solid. I'm going to be greedy. It'd be nice if it was 2.6, but 1.6 is solid. We have an excellent trait platform as far as herbicide and weed control, and lots of varieties to pick from across the RM from a 1-1 all the way up to a 3-1 for Northwest Iowa. So again, against first the E3 class and other competitors, just really outstanding performance, and been seeing that across the board.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's always harder to see as big a separation on soybeans. We know E3 beans have improved over the last few years, so there's some good competition there. And we try to put some of the newest of the Pioneer E3s in our plots, so we're trying to go against the best, but still feel good on average, at least having that advantage. And looking at some of the balance summaries within our own Asgrow brand on that early side, it's been fun to see the 19XF3s. A lot of comparisons here, 30 fields that we're looking at, and essentially just a 0.3 of a bushel advantage on the 19XF3s. But we know we're getting a lot more defense for IDC. Of course, the phytophthora with the 19XF3s. So you want the defense, but it's nice to see also just a little bit more top end. Then jumping up into that early group too, 23XF2s, solid choice when we do have a little bit more of a high pH to deal with. 23XF3s, as far as the brand new variety that we didn't get a chance to see much at all last year in our plots, since it was coming from South America, but has done very well both in plots as well as fields. And 24XF1s as well. That one's still kind of the kingpin, especially if you're dealing with white mold and standability issues for high fertility. That one is really a key variety if we know we've got to put it in that manure background field. So good to see that grouping been doing very well. 23XF3 is just a little bit more top end. And really, that's where I wanted to wrap it up. I know we could go on for a long time, but also want to be respectful of everybody's time since we're very busy. But as usual, we've got the QR code up. So if you are CCA, go ahead and snap that. Get half credit in crop management, but certainly open it up for questions, comments for Craig and I before we sign off here.
Yeah, Jim, I was going to add just a couple things back to your DORT rootworm comparisons that you showed there, and just looking at my data real quick and looking at some extreme pressure situations. And doing protocol work is always a difficult thing in rootworm trials, but looking at the double pro hybrid and it was 105-35 with and without soil applied insecticide under extreme pressure is only about a 3 bushel advantage, which is really shocking. And in one plot, it was 22 bushel advantage for soil applied. And then in the other plot, it lost by 16. So, and that was under extreme pressure. So again, that's probably spot in the field, and maybe the roots I dug didn't have as much pressure or whatever. But as far as the root scores, the soil applied insecticide cleaned up the nodal root score by 1.1 nodes. So that's pretty effective insecticide control for this year. So I had like a 0.57 versus a 1.67 for no applied insecticide. And then overall, which would include a rotated acre with moderate pressure for extended diapause, all 3 locations, I got about an 8 bushel response for soil applied insecticide on the Double Pro, but the Smart Stacks Pro add another 20 bushel. So without insecticide. So again, really solid performance for the 105-33, and just looks really good. And that trait's holding together very excellent, and the nodal scores are excellent. So just kind of wanted to add that in.
No, that's good. Yeah, and it does seem like this year overall, from what I've seen on the data coming in so far, and also just what growers have said, soil applied insecticides, I think, did a good job. We were relatively dry in the early part of the season, so that helped give it some residual. And we also didn't have as many ultra early planting dates. There wasn't a lot of corn that got in, say, the 12th, 15th of April. So sometimes when we got that combination of mid-April planting, a lot of rain in the spring, you can really lose that insecticide residual by the time we get into the rootworm hatch. But obviously we had that heavy rain the second week of May, but overall we were generally a little drier as throughout April and into June for the most part. Well, anything else, Craig, that you want to add to the group?
Again, I wish I had more of my local data summarized, Jim. That's the part that I was worried about. I mean, I wanted to be on the call, and I just I'm not going to have enough time, and want to evaluate. I'm looking at short corn versus commercial corn, and I do know there's definitely a trend there where the population advanced as far as planting more seeds of the short corn hybrids paid in the short corn, but didn't pay in the commercial corn. So there's some interesting things there. Looking at some biologicals over the top in corn. Didn't see any good response for that particular product, but one of the treatments was adding 20% more nitrogen. Guess what? That paid big time. So that was interesting. So again, as I get more slides and data built, those will be things that I'll be sharing with you, and you can put them on the next DACAT. And if I can get on the next one, if you want me back on the call, I'd be more than happy to come back on and talk about some of these things locally.
Oh, yeah, that would be great. Yeah, we're looking forward to a lot of the data that you'll put out. Boy, what's it been? 12 hours that you've been out of the combine, so I don't know. Don't know why the data is not summarized. All right. Well, we better cut it off. I know we're a little bit over time, but appreciate everyone for being on, and take care, and have yourself a good day.
Yep. Thanks, everybody. Thanks, Jim.
Thanks, Craig, for being on. Appreciate it.
See ya.
Thanks.